Well, welcome to Don't Know Much About with me, Dr. Nielect, where curiosity kicks off the conversation. And today I sit down with a special guest, Natasha H. Pine, who was born in the former Soviet Union and fled with her parents to Israel in her early teens to escape the oppressive Soviet regime. After nearly a decade in Israel, her family immigrated to Canada, where she's lived for over 30 years. Well, welcome, Natasha, to Don't Know Much About with me. I'm really excited to have you. Um, I don't know if you know, you're my fourth guest. And again, it just happens to be that all my guests are immigrants. So, but you and I share a former birth country that no longer exists. So, welcome to my show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
So I begin always with asking people what their tagline is, because my show's tagline is "It all starts with a question." But I kind of want to do something different with you. I think that you have so much to offer us. My show is really called "Don't Know Much About," and I'm wondering if we could kick it off by you telling me or telling us in the West, what do people don't know much about when it comes to anti-Zionism? What don't they know?
They don't know a lot, but let's start. Yeah. So um, as my tagline says, defend the truth, deliver results and never surrender. And what that really means is we defending the truth by exposing anti-Zionism or exposing hate and exposing um, what we've been experiencing so far. And we're really exposing also it's not just around, it's not just in the institutions, but also especially in education, because that is really where it starts. And unfortunately, that is how it continues forward as well. And when I mean deliver a result is really can we make it impactful in the most effective way to actually combat anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, as there are two different things. And I don't accept surrender because I've tried different ways. I'll try always to find a way to basically to fight and defeat, and I don't accept a no, and I will continue, and I will not surrender to do it until like I'll get it done.
Yeah, I love that. I love the resolve. I find that resolve is very common among immigrants, both immigrants from the former Soviet Union, immigrants from the Middle East, Jewish immigrants, really people who survived totalitarianism. They're survivors, you know? But so you said a couple things that make me ponder. You said, and maybe I misunderstood, so this is a good time to clarify. You said, I'm really passionate about explaining to people about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism because I think they're different. Do you think they're different?
They're very much so different. And I, even though they started maybe from the same roots, but the roots for anti-Zionism comes from Judenhass, and so is the roots for anti-Semitism comes from Judenhass. They're both anti-Semitism is really comes from the right, which is opposing Jews for their ethnic and racial identity. Anti-Semites usually justify the exclusion and dehumanization and oppression and persecution of the and extermination even of the Jewish people, where anti-Zionism is really the anti-Israel, which is Jews who were targeted for their race from the country perspective and denies Jewish rights to self-determination, and it challenges Israel's existence. And this is, even though a lot of we think they are the same, because because it's a mutated, the way I see it, and this is how I explain it also to children and to adults who really don't understand, is like it's a mutated virus. If you look at it as a mutated virus, then it's easier to understand, because originally it was Judophobia, so they used the libels that are related to religious hate, from the Judophobia, meaning the anti-Judaism. So it's a Christ killer's libels, right? And then and different conspiracies like a well poisoning, and then moving on to the Judenhass, when it was the Jew hatred as a basically cultural Jew hatred, where it's targeting Jews as a people and basically mutated, and also the libels mutate as well. So it mutates across time, and it mutates and it's in different generations, and it's in different and around the world. So when you look at, even though it came from Germany, as a translation from Judenhass, literally Jew hatred. So basically, when you look at that, the libels have changed as well. Every time it mutates, the libels change, but the goal is always the same. It's against the Jews. So after World War II, after the Holocaust, basically anti-Zionism was mutated, anti-Semitism was mutated to anti-Zionism, and the libels were mutated to anti-Zionism as well, which was, instead of targeting the Jews because that was a taboo after World War II, now the Soviets engineered it to replace the Jew with the Zionist, and then it becomes basically the it'll be Jewish and so anti-Israel, so anti-Zionist, and anything that was related to Zionism was made. The Soviets made it basically vile and made it look like it's evil. So that was the idea, and that's where it. And the Soviets were completely engineering the entire propaganda, which was very sophisticated. And I lived through this actually as my personal experiences on a daily basis in the Soviet Union, how they use anti-Israel propaganda, but the results was the same. It was we as a children or people, the Jewish people who suffered in the Soviet Union because Zionist meant Jewish.
Mhm.
Everybody knew that. Even a child in the Soviet Union knew that
Yeah,
Zionists are Jews.
yeah. Oh, I want to talk to you about your personal story, but I think this is important to kind of dig a little deeper and do a little bit more clarification. So I think you're actually saying that actually, if I understand you correctly, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are not different. It's just that they are evolved. One is an evolved form of the former, right? So
Exactly.
right. So in the sense that, and I've written about this, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he's the one who really talked about anti or Jew hatred as a virus, going through these three stages of Christian anti-Judaism, or you say Judeophobia, to anti-Semitism, Judenhass, to anti-Zionism. And what you're also pointing out is that each variant had its own taxonomy of libels, right?
Exactly.
And
Hmm.
so it's very important to call those libels out, which we're going to discuss in just a bit. And so, which brings me to a really important point that you made, which is that anti-Zionism was birthed, crafted, created by the Soviets, specifically after the Second World War. Can you talk about that? Can you explain why do you think they couldn't just, resort to and Jew hatred 2.0? Why did they have to create a Jew hatred 3.0? Why do you think the Soviets did that?
So first of all, before even the Soviets, anti-Zionism was there, but it really didn't take off. And the reason is because there was a resistance to Zionism, to modern Zionism. It was even from some Jews. It was a resistance from some many non-Jews, but it wasn't so strong because really there weren't token Jews. There were no token Jews back then, really, who resisted in in a great power against actually the self-determination of the Jewish people. And why it was actually developed so well in the Soviet Union, the Russians actually had a lot. They had a lot of Jew hatred, and especially it's a history that was in Russia. It's laid through the protocols of this of design, and that is basically that's they created. So they created that part, and they created a lot of pieces because when it comes to you wonder why is the Soviet children become so cruel. It doesn't come just like that. It comes from it comes from the generation and generation and centuries that are first they create first they created the protocols of the Zion, and then they're actually propagated this around the world in different languages. So by 1920 that was already popularized.
Mhm.
And then by the time it came to the and 1916, Lenin was already calling a libel Zionist in basically bourgeois imperialism.
Mhm.
So by 1920, that was already translated. The Protocol of Zions was completely translated to all languages, and it was so popular that the fact that it was so popular just tells you that it's that where we live at that point, the era that was already there in the 1920s, right? And then by the time it come to the Soviet, basically, government did not just tolerate Jew hatred, it's institutionalized it by promoting Jew hatred through relentless anti-Zionist propaganda. They really portraying Israel as imperialist and evil and colonizer and racist apartheid, like all of that that came originally from the imperialism, basically bourgeois imperialists from Lenin, and when they created the first token Jewish organization in the world, which is Еврейская, Yevsetska in Russian means Еврейская секция of the Communist Party, meaning the Jewish section of the Communist Party. They really they converting the Jews into communism, and if they were not successful to convert them, they will actually put them in jail in Siberia or execute them. So this was very common, with very dark, times to the Jewish community back then. So
Yeah.
basically, yeah, so like I say, the roots are coming from the Russian Tsars, and basically even in the early 1900s, and a part of this campaign to scapegoat it during the political unrest. And it was always meant to actually put attention, distract the population again from the Tsar into and the problems that they had in the Russian, empire into something else. And that was their strategy on a regular basis. Stalin supported the establishment of Israel, but hoping that it would become a communist ally in the Middle East. But, that never happened. So he saw that that didn't go anywhere.
He
So
turned
it
against,
basically,
right.
yeah. So he actually changed his strategy. He reframed the anti-Semitism using Marxist-Lenin terms. So the themes from the protocols of the elders of Zion were actually repurposed under new language. Instead of Jews, the enemy became Zionist, like the cosmopolitan, the rootless elements. Yeah. So the Soviets kind of they couldn't say it was the protocols of the elders of Zion. So what they did is they used the Marxist-Lenin terms into modifying it and into protocols of the elders, basically into the communist way to make it look like it's completely a communist idea, but it really wasn't. It was just a continuation.
Right.
And basically, yeah,
Yeah.
the
So
themes, it's also important to know that the themes from the protocols of elder science were repurposed under completely new language. And that new language is, it's basically was to replace the new conspiracy, replace the new libels using the Soviet propaganda. And also by using that language of a class struggle that was blended with racialized conspiracy theories, accusing Jews of agents of capitalist imperialism or bourgeois nationalism, they actually created ideological bridge between anti-Zionism and the anti-Semitic motives of the protocols. And that's what's made them so successful, because they actually created that bridge and then moved into basically rebranded it as a racist movement.
right. As you're speaking, I have so many things I want to say, but I do want to just say that in terms of talking about the Soviet roots of contemporary anti-Zionism, a lot has been written by Isabella Tabarovsky. As you know, she's also
Yeah.
she's probably one of the first who brought to the Western audience what we in the Soviet Union knew, and she brought it via journalism to the West to talk about the Soviet origins of anti-Zionism, and also draws on the protocols of the elders of Zion. Two things I want to mention as you were speaking. You said about Lenin. So interestingly enough about Lenin is that in 1919 or 1918, he delivered an interesting speech in which he
Mhm.
said that in the Soviet Union, we're going to outlaw anti-Semitism. And if you listen to the speech or if you go read it, and it's readily available, you can Google it. It's a
Yeah.
fascinating study because he's framing the entire anti-Semitism problem as a problem of capitalism and the bourgeois. In other
Yes.
words, anti-Semitism must be rooted out, not because it's bad on its own. Anti-Semitism must be rooted out because it's a byproduct of capitalism. It's a byproduct of, the bourgeois. Simultaneously, you're saying while issuing this denouncement of anti-Semitism, he's also cultivating a new language within Marxism on Zionism. And why do I want to point that out? Because I'm in the United States of America, you're in Canada. I'm not really, I don't have my pulse so much on what's happening in Canada. But in the United States of America, we have Jewish, by the way, and non-Jewish, but I'll talk about Jewish organizations and Jewish individuals who say things like we denounce all forms of anti-Semitism, but anti-Zionism is political. Um, which leads me to the next question. You said, and I agree with you entirely, that in the Soviet Union, child, adult equally knew that when they went Zionist, they meant Jew. Everybody knew. The non-Jews knew and the Jews. Would you agree? They
Yes, 100%.
why don't they
Yes.
know? Okay, so why don't they know here? Why do I've been doing this for over 20 years with the Jewish community in America. Why do the Jewish community in America do not understand what you just laid out so perfectly about the roots of anti-Zionism going to Protocol Y? Why do you think that is? I'm genuinely wondering.
It's a good question because the Jew hatred in Russia was so rooted deeply. So even when even when they replaced that language to Zionist, right, as opposed to a Jew, they didn't call a Jew anymore. They couldn't say Jews are bad in the Soviet Union. They just say Zionists are bad, and that doesn't mean that they meant, yeah, they obviously meant people who live in Israel, the Zionists are bad, but they also meant the people in Russia who live, and they wanted to be politically correct. And the protocols were never formally adopted by the Soviet because they wanted to appear as a leader of anti-racist, right, an anti-imperialist world. But instead, they embedded their tropes and coded ideological language accusing Jews as dual loyalty and financial manipulation, whatever that is, and betrayal of socialism.
Mhm.
But the thing is that they're still accused Jews of things, but this time they didn't say Jews. So it was a code, and as somehow everybody knew that that code was now became Zionist, became a Jew, but you can't say Jew, so it was a Zionist.
But
It, it,
everybody
it was
knew in the
all
Soviet,
coded.
but everybody
Pardon?
knew. But everybody knew in the Soviet Union, even
Yes.
despite the coding. My question, I don't know if you can, is really why is it so difficult for our Jewish leaders? I'm talking about the United, I don't know how it is in Canada, to understand that Zionism means Jew and anti-Zionism means anti-Jew. I'm genuinely struggling to understand.
And it's interesting because in the Soviet system, like during Yevsevsky time and the revolution, what they try to do, they're trying to completely take the entire Judaism and basically strip Jews of everything, of their religion, of
Mhm.
their culture, of entire identity. They try to do that very deeply. They try to do it by separate, and why? Because they want Jews to associate only to the Soviet Union without having any loyalty to any, and by but that didn't do that, I guess, the job, because Jews still associate themselves with Israel. And I think every Jew, when they saw a Jew in Russia and Soviet Union, they associated a Jew with Israel because they saw Israel as a country with many Jews,
Mhm.
right? And that is basically, and to them is, here is one Jew, here are many Jews,
Yeah.
right? It's to them it meant the same thing. And the Jews in Russia never say they were anti-Israel. Well, I mean, they maybe openly would say that because they were afraid of their lives, but they will never, because they will never actually say it in, to between themselves, because the code was, and they went through a lot of hardship during Stalin time, by the way. And so, and that could be also what happened. I mean, in Canada and US, let's be honest, we didn't have the Stalin's time in Canada and US, thank God. And the doctor's plot and all of that the Jews had to go through during Stalin time, it was really brutal.
Mhm.
The times were extreme, and you couldn't. it wasn't just about Jews. During Stalin time, there were many, many other people.
Right.
But for Zionists, it was a key thing, right? Anybody who is Jewish. So by them going through this, plus the fact that the racism was so high in the Jew hatred was so high in Russia, even before that, the foundation of Jew hatred, and it was already there.
Mhm.
And when we're looking at comparison between Canada and US, and I call Canada and US and North America,
It
the
is.
foundation of Jew hatred was not here. Let's be honest, right? So when you look at it, it was a clean slate coming to Canada. The background, if anybody brought it with themselves, the immigrants, whether it was the British or it was the immigrants or the French colony, like it's still it was the it was still not the same level as it was in the Soviet Union. So I think that is really where the key differentiation was.
Okay, so let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about your experience in the Soviet Union with this institutional Jew hatred of anti-Zionism. Can you I mean, look, people who know me very well know I don't like victimology and I'm not here, but I think it's very important because we're so missing the danger of anti-Zionism that I'm not willing. I think it's very important. It's urgent that people understand how dangerous this third variant is. So please, can you share a few experiences? I mean, I could share too, but I mean, I was a little kid. I could share my parents' story, but you have your own story. So why don't you, if you can please share anything about what you faced, what you experienced?
So my journey really into fighting anti-Zionism is deeply personal. I carry with me like really scars of anti-Semitism from the Soviet Union, unfortunately. What I call the evil empire, and and I will never in my life ever forget why my parents left really the Soviet Union. It was like as if it happened yesterday. To me, that memory. It's really like as if it was literally happened yesterday. It wasn't just for a better life that my parents left. It was to escape the oppressive Soviet regime that humiliated and really dehumanized us as being Jewish. And as a Jewish child, I was called Zhidovka almost daily. It meant a dirty Jew. I was shamed simply for existing, literally. My grandparents were traditional Jews doing their best to maintain Jewish life under brutal conditions of the Soviet Union. And even small acts of faith were rarely risky because we did keep the holidays, where my grandparents were observant in some way of shape or form that they could in the Soviet Union. So one of my most traumatic memories were happened during the Passover when I went to my grandmother's house for lunch, and brought matzah back to school. So my grandmother lived right across the street, and I went to her for lunch, and I brought matzah back with me after lunch. I was late for about a couple of minutes, and the teacher looked at my matzah, and instead of understanding, she humiliated me and forcing me is to stand in the corner for 45 minutes until the end of the lesson, basically. So I was one of the top students in the class, but that really didn't matter. So it didn't matter that I was a great student. I was always amazing in the class. I was like, basically, they always had this board in school and in the class who is the best, like the best student of the class, the best, student of the whole school. I was always on those boards. So it didn't matter that me being there, I bring the matzah and I end up in the corner for 45 minutes. So this is during basically the break, the children mocked me and called me names, and that was very painful, and I remember that. And I
How
basically,
you?
I never talked about this story until my son's bar mitzvah, actually, because my son asked me about it. And because I tried not to remember those scars, because I don't like to be a victim, and like you say, it's like to and I had to explain it to him how it was in the Soviet time. And I told him, you must never forget your identity, because that it didn't matter. Yes, I was mocked. I went home in tears. I told my parents, I don't want to be Jewish anymore. I wanted to be Russian. This is what I told my parents. I was a little girl. I didn't understand. And that was a breaking point for my parents. And they knew something that had to be changed. And basically, we needed to leave. this oppressive regime. They never told me, but they went, they applied to, to get the visa to Israel. And as soon as my parents applied to immigrate to Israel, everything got worse because my teacher began double down really on brainwashing the class daily with messages about how evil Israel is and how evil Zionism were. They never said about Jews. They said how daily almost. I'm telling you, like before, maybe it was once a week, but now it was daily. They talk about this. The entire class knew I was leaving for Israel. They never talked about that I was leaving for Israel, but they already, because me, like all the spotlight was on me. And the school made sure to indoctrinate the other children even more aggressively. And they were experts at humiliation and shame. And, they made sure I felt it every single day. Like wasn't. So the Soviet propaganda was so effective that even I didn't want to leave. Honestly, I didn't want to leave to Israel. I was afraid. I thought it was really evil because that's how they brainwashed me. I was scared to go to Israel. I had been taught that Israel was dangerous, that it was evil, that it was a terrible place. I believed like what they told us because I was a little girl and I was a child and school and on TV everything they say, right? I couldn't understand why my parents would want to go there and take me there. So that's how deeply brainwashing, and how that was their basically strategy, not just to others, but it was also affected me. I told my mom, I'm going to hide under the bed and I'm going to stay with my grandma. I'm not going to go to Israel. And, obviously I went to Israel.
How old were you at this time?
I was in the early teens,
Uh-huh.
so before bat mitzvah.
Uh-huh.
And when I came to Israel, then I saw a whole different world. It was like, wow. I felt like I actually didn't realize a world like this existed. I actually felt like, wow, like everything, I realized that everything they told me was a lie. Like because, in Russia, you have to wait in line up for everything. Wait up in line up for toilet paper, for chocolate. You don't ever even get a chocolate, or you do, but it would be so rare. You wait line up for bread, line up for eggs, line up for this. You go to Israel, you're in the supermarket. Oh my God. It's like you have everything on the shelves. You like people wear beautiful things. People like, you know what I mean? It's like you're in a whole different world. You can say whatever you want. You don't have to be afraid to worry about what to say. It was a whole different experience for me as a child, and I felt like that. Then I realized how but they didn't right away. Obviously, like to me, it was emotional. Making that sort of change and realizing who was really evil here. The evil empire was the Soviet empire. That wasn't Israel. That was the evil empire. And that's why Reagan was always right. It was the evil empire.
Yes.
But when you ask, yeah,
Well,
this is,
I want to just pause for a second because I think it's very important for listeners and viewers to take in something essential here. Most of the time, people talk about anti-Zionism as a political disagreement, and they say
yeah,
anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. It doesn't harm Jews. But your story shows the complete opposite. In fact, we know that wherever anti-Zionism manifests, wherever it proliferates, wherever it comes, it directly harms Jews. That little girl, you, who was in that class without having to directly say, here she is and she's going to Israel, yet everybody knew you're going to Israel and talking about Israel as the big bad wolf, the demon, the villain,
yeah,
that created a very hostile environment for you, for that little Jewish girl. Do you understand? You understand. And
yeah,
so when people incorrectly say anti-Zionism is not Jew hatred, it couldn't be further from the truth because wherever anti-Zionism is allowed to fester, Jews are harmed. And it doesn't
exactly.
begin with physical harm. It begins with emotional, psychological harm, alienation, erasure, demonization. And then it's just a very quick step from beating people up for the crime of being Zionists. And this is already
Yes,
happening on our streets. I don't know how it is in Canada. In the United States of America, Jews are being beat up for the crimes of Israel. They're being targeted. We had a death of in Washington, D.C. in May, I
Yeah,
believe,
I know.
of the yes,
I
of the
remember.
couple. He screamed free Palestine and shot them to death. So to me, the case is closed in terms of whether we need to figure out whether anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are one and the same. They are. There's not, it's not a political disagreement. And I think your story is just so powerful because, and I'm sorry that you went through that, but it's important to keep on telling people to show that where anti-Zionism discourse, anti-Zionism is allowed to spread 100%, it affects Jews. Moreover, what I want to also discuss with you is that, interestingly enough, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the phantom legs of this propaganda campaign of anti-Zionism seemed to also collapse and find new life in the West. Your story of being that child in a classroom is the story of kids in our schools right now, in public schools. And it's
Yes.
like that in Canada, where they're sitting in classes with teachers showing maps, sometimes replacing Israel with Palestine, erasure, talking about Israel as this racist, white supremacist colonial state. And this, it's unbelievable that it is happening here in the United States. How do you explain this? How?
Well,
I'm
it's obviously, well, first of all, what we're experiencing in Canada, again, didn't come so, it wasn't just in the last 2 years. It's festered for years and years, right? Like I said, and the way that the same way Soviets projected reality,
I lost you.
the same as Soviets projected their reality into Israel to generate anti-Zionist libel to justify their oppression, that the Jews that always led to this discrimination, harsh quotas, harassment, stigmatization, exclusion, and violence. This is the things not only this in the Soviets that we experience, but we experiencing now, and we experiencing a
I see. And what I don't, I'm curious, what has been the communities, the Jewish community's response in Canada to the anti-Zionism, would you say?
So the Jewish community in Canada is just, I'll just give you perspective how bad it is in Canada. So since 20 basically 23 sorry, since October 7, the rise of basically anti-Semitic, or they back then they didn't know and they couldn't separate between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism incidents. So B'nai B'rith Canada actually collects all the incidents and consolidates, and it was a 110% increase since October 7 in 1 year, right? So later, and obviously we only have the results of 2024, so increase was additional 7.5%. So we're looking at 6,219 just for the entire Canada now. It's a lot for Canada. We only 35-ish million people, right? And we're looking at as all together, and we're looking at 6,218. So this is giving you an idea the incidence in Canada. And if you actually calculate how much it is per day, it's 17 incidents per day. So that's what we are experiencing in Canada, which is a lot for Canada, considering that we have about 400,000 Jews in Canada. So, and that is, and in schools, when we look in, just a report not long ago was released by Government of Canada, and it's really up to show expose the pandemic of Jew hatred, really, in Ontario schools. It only covers Ontario schools, the report, but it's actually show you the perspective how bad it is. And what you even see in a report, the numbers are less than half of what the reality is. The reality is more than double. So they're looking, and they're showing that 10% of Jewish kids in Ontario experience at least once a hate in school, and in an hate incident, and over 40% involve Nazi salute, which is a lot. And then the 60% is anti-Zionist in school. But even those Nazi salutes, in schools, the kids don't know any difference between that this is a right wing or not. This is all as a result of anti-Zionist propaganda. It's all as a result of libels. Because at schools, they allow libels because they, in the district school boards, they approved materials to erase Israel. They justify violence. There are books. They distort history. This is all allowed in Ontario schools, and basically there are and it's funneling from different outsiders as well in like influence, right? So we're looking at there's Qatar, there's China, there's a whole bunch of other influence, and obviously Iran as well influence Canada, heavily influence Canada as
How is the
well.
Jewish
So there's
community responding?
pardon.
How does the Jewish community respond, would you say,
Well, to what? To
to the
the
anti-Zionism?
to the
To
anti-Zionism. The Jewish community is, for them, it's hard to, I think, to, how would I say, it's digest, to understand what do we do with anti-Zionism. So it took not long ago just to actually admit that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism, but it took that long, right? And it's not long ago, only a few months ago, they already, talking about that there is a genocide libel. It's a libel. Yes, of course it's a libel, but it takes so long for us to actually move towards this direction. And yet there are many people like me that coming being immigrants, and especially from a Soviet regime, people from a Soviet Union, a former Soviet Union, they are so easily recognizing the libels because they lived it. It was there for them. Like they understand what libel is and what is not. They can see it. But many people in Canada, unfortunately, cannot. And then it takes up, maybe they can, but they're afraid, right? The Jewish community is afraid, or they don't know how to respond. Is it a
well,
lie? Like they
well,
say it's a lie, or they don't, there's variation of it.
I think that, and here I think there are similarities between America and Canada. I think that in the United States of America, so much of the resources within the Jewish world went to Holocaust education and trying to understand
Yes.
uh, Jew hatred 2.0, so they can identify anti-Semitism, classic anti-Semitism of the Nazi era. They swastikas they know are bad.
Yeah.
Nationalism is bad. Us, them, scapegoating, othering, they understand. And they made a mistake, I believe. They made a mistake. They put so many resources in Holocaust education, thinking that the Holocaust, 6 million people died and anti-Semitism died, but it didn't die. And that's been the big mistake of a lot of these Jewish professionals who didn't understand that the nature of this hatred is that it evolves. It has to evolve. And
Yes.
it's hard for them to understand it, is what I think. So I think it ironically has to do with all the resources that have been put in Holocaust education. And in the year 2016, when I myself was wanting to develop curriculum, I would go to Jewish day schools in Los Angeles and I would try to show them the things that I developed, curriculum. And the heads of schools looked at me and they said, and they weren't joking. They said, "I don't understand. We have a Holocaust education department. What is this? What we have a we do anti-Semitism. It's in we teach the Holocaust." And my heart would sink every time because I'm like, you're not understanding. You're not understanding that that's not what, I'm sorry, I'm going to sound very, very crass right now, but when we have a contemporary Jew hating event, bringing a Holocaust survivor to speak is not going to help. Bringing them to
No.
a Holocaust museum is not going to help. I'm not saying we should forget and not teach it, but it's not compatible. It's resistant to the third iteration, that variant of anti-Zionism. All the things that we've taught about anti-Semitism is resistant to anti-Zionism, or rather
It's only going
anti-Zionism
to help.
to it. Yes.
Yeah. It's only going to help when you bring a Holocaust survivor into, speak about it. When a Holocaust survivor will talk about that what happened then, it's exactly what happens now. So basically, when they actually draw parallels, because it's exactly the same, just different libels. They change from Nazi libels to basically to current anti-Zionist libels. And the anti-Zionist libels were all created by the way, by the Soviet Union. And the brilliancy of how they created it, they did it in the order of the fact of the way that the order was very strategic, because they knew they can't jump to the genocide libel because people will never accept it. So they started with colonizer libel, basically removing Israel existence, right? By actually removing, completely rewriting our history, and then basically uh, inverting the Holocaust reality, right, and to Israel, and saying that Jews, Zionism is racist libel, and then going into apartheid libel, using the South African apartheid into Israel as well, and then the genocide libel. So they were very strategic. They picked the libels, every one of them they created, every one of them. And that's moved from completely different than what the Nazi had, but yet they're still libels. And actually, a lot of Holocaust survivors understand that, because when I interview them, specifically for my book, every one of them tells me it's the same thing. They tell me they call us names, they exclude us, and stigmatize us, and then basically they commit violence and then deny it. And they tell me without me even asking if that's exactly what they tell me in the story. They say this is exactly the same thing, except it's just a different words. Before, they told us that we were racial polluters. This is what the Nazis say. Now we're colonizers,
Mhm.
right? Now we that's genocide libel. Before it was Christ killers, but they understand that, they get it. And I think what the most of Jewish communities organization did not get is how to show the parallels to the world, that it is the same thing. How we actually and it just the libels change. The violence is the same. People try to exclude it. Everything is the same. We just this we just it's just a different face, completely different face, but it's really an old hate. It's just giving you a different mask, that's all it is. And
Absolutely.
but like I say, the brilliancy of the Soviet Union, it was, and because it was so brilliantly done, the effects of it is still continuous in the Western civilization, because they actually put a lot of money into into Western campuses back in the 70s. So they promoted it in their Soviet propaganda back then, and basically weaponized it through UN and NGOs back then to legitimize Israel. They knew what it's gonna, it's basically the effect it's gonna take, and they targeted specifically the schools. They knew that that's the results that's going to happen, and it's going to be a long-term results. And it didn't matter that the resolution was basically revoked in 1991, Zionism is racism, but the impact for almost 20 years was already there. That's it. The damage was already done, and they're still continuing. They're still claiming that Zionism is racism. You see how long it actually takes this, and this is still in our schools. We experience this still now at schools, and we can, every time we want to bring a book that is pro-Israel book, they won't allow us. But the books that you find in the library, in Ontario Library, thousands that are,
And
anti-Zionist,
yes,
racist books.
it's here as well. So I think you said I want to just again synthesize and simplify because it's very complicated things, but it's very essential that we simplify. And that is, it doesn't really matter really which variant you're looking at, anti-Judaism,
Exactly.
anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, there are certain mechanisms that go into place in order to get to the goal, and the goal is extermination. I really believe that Hannah Arendt said, or
100%.
is the goal of all Jew haters or anti-Semitism is annihilation. And I think it's really important to identify those. So libels, I think, are one of the mechanisms, erasure,
Yes.
demonization, and
Yes.
and
Double standards.
double standards, right? So
Yes.
these are mechanisms meant to put into place in order to fuel an ideology to then be able to exterminate, erase, um, take Jews out.
And the most
Here's
important, tokenization. Without tokenization, they will never be successful. It's
Mhm.
because there are tokenized Jews that make it happen.
And the
If we
Soviets
don't
did
have
that.
tokenized Jews, that will never happen.
Yes, and thank you. That's very important because the Soviets understood this. The Soviets even had a Jewish anti-Zionist committee, so they
Yes.
created their choke and Zeus. But let me challenge you like this, and I hope you're not going to be upset with me, but I'm just as a devil's advocate. Are you saying that we like nobody can ever criticize the Jewish people? Every criticism is a libel. We can never criticize the Jewish people. When is it not a libel?
when we don't have double standards. When if you apply, let's say somebody criticizes a Jewish person or Israel, but if you expect from a Jewish person in Israel to have higher standards, 10 times more standards or double standards, whatever that is, higher standards than it is of other people, then then you are not criticizing anymore. Then you actually, it's a libel. Because when and genocide is a perfect one of those, because nobody cares about Sudan, nobody cares about what happens in Afghanistan, nobody cares about anything except, or even Syria, what just happens in the last month or so, right? Yeah, nobody cares about that. But yes, everybody cares about what happens in Gaza. And in fact, all the lies that actually generated from Gaza. And every time we prove that it's a lie, even the CIA, when they came out with a report that there's a 2% increase in Gaza population since October 7, which is in October 2024, a year after October 7, they came out with a report, the CIA came out with a report showing there was a 2% increase in Gaza population, showing that it's not a genocide. So basically, but they're going to come up with a new libel every single time. They are ahead of us every single time.
Yeah, which
So they
brings me
will,
to strategy. I agree with you. I think that they're absolutely brilliant and ahead of us, but
yes,
we're a brilliant people. And so
yes.
we are a brilliant people. We are an amazing nation. I want to talk about strategies. What do you think is a good strategy? What if you've been developing pieforall.org, you're writing a book, the Anti-Zionism Playbook, The New Face of an Old Hate. You came up with a resource called Israel 5,000 Years of History. Beautiful. I mean, I by the way, I really encourage everyone to absolutely go on pieforall.org. Excellent educational material. And you're talking about education right now, but I'm talking advocacy. I'm talking about the war, then this war. What do we do? How do we combat this war? It's like the $1 million question. What do you?
So number one, the number one thing that we have to do, we first have to understand and admit that it's there. Basically, we need to understand what we actually fighting against, right? Once we all understand that what we're fighting against and what the strategies of basically and the tactics that are used by anti-Zionism, we're fighting anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism has a playbook. We need to understand what that playbook is. You cannot fight an enemy without understanding what the enemy is. You cannot. What are the pillars of this anti-Zionist strategy? It needs to understand and identify those pillars, which I have been working and identifying, because one of the key importance that a lot of people don't realize is, and I realize this through varieties of ways as I've been involved in advocacy, came to conclusion, is, and especially working with Jeffa, is that it's all through DEI. The reason that we're able to get into the system is because anti-Zionists are very clever. So there, and that is actually, again, coming from the Soviet, because Soviet used a socialism to deliver and spread hate. So basically, and they use communism, right? And Marxism, the same thing. Here is used the delivery mechanism into institutions is Marxism ideology. So we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they're diversified. So when you look at that ideology, there is oppress and oppressor, right? So they consider Jews as oppressors, and why? Because they consider Jews as white people. They don't because they don't consider Jews as, when you look at Israel and in general Jews, more than half of us are not white. So white is really the minority. But the point is that's not the mentality of the DEI, and this is one of my chapters. It's a big chapter that I talk about this in my book. Is actually, I've done a lot of research showing that the diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually, that whole wokeism is actually hijacked the central liberalism from, and turned it into what it is today. And basically, and the whole idea of oppressorism is a Marxist ideology, because the whole idea came from the fact that it's dividing the classes, and here it's divided based on your success. And in the Marx's ideology was based on the class, different classes. So the class here is: are you successful? Are you not successful? And if you are successful and you graduate with from high school, then you're oppressor. And if you're not graduating from high school, what's the percentage of people not graduating from high school? Those are the oppressed. And that is how they divided the people. And by the way, into DSB, it's their manifesto. It's actually into DSB, and it's in their a whole indoctrination of that. Who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor? So if a child who is a white child or a Jewish child walks into a daycare or a kindergarten, is automatically considered oppressor. And a black person or a Palestinian will be considered oppressed automatically. And this is how they infiltrated so deeply, and this is how it's hard to fight, because we don't understand those elements of delivery mechanism. We're not going to be able to fight it. This is one of the key elements how they went. Also,
so your
yeah,
first is really study the playbook, understand who you're up against, understand the pillars,
exactly.
understand the mechanisms, understand anti-Zionism. What else would you say? So
I would say like a car.
let me challenge you this way, or rather ask you a different way. Let's say you understand, you and I understand, for instance, that
Yeah.
genocide is a libel. Do you think it is effective to say that's a libel? That's a libel. That's a libel. All right. Imagine you're a student in Ontario. I'm in, I don't know, California, and we're both in a classroom, and the professor or teacher says something that's not true and libelous about Israel. We raise our hand and we go, Professor, I just want to let you know that what you just did and what you just said was a libel. And I explained the libel. This is a libel, and it's no different than libel X, which was used during the Nazi era. I just wanted you to know, Professor, you are right now engaging in very dangerous territory. Do you think that that is what needs to be done?
I absolutely think that we have to confront libels. By being quiet about this, we'll never win this battle. We have to confront the libels. The whole reason we're here, because we have not confronted libels in over decades. It's been festering. This in the colonizer libel, it's not a surprise. The apartheid, all of this has been in educational institutions since the 70s.
Yes.
So, and
So,
we never, so yes, we have to, of course, we have to confront it. And we have to stand up and confront it. And the problem with us is we don't have the backing of our institutions, right? So, and of course they come after the fact, and they come a lot later, right? With our like major institutions. And when we are united, and if we fight together, we'll be very powerful. And the idea is that we do need to unite. And it is unfortunately sometimes takes a massive force like October 7th to unite us and go towards something. But I'm glad to see that a lot of them woken up. And there's a lot of grassroots that understands that there are libels, that there's anti-Zionism, and we need to fight it. And we're fighting it. And we need to repeat it, continuously repeat it, and show that it's a libel. It's not going to be right away. It's obviously going to be resistance, but we need to be persistent, and we should never give up and never surrender. And that's what I always say: never give up, never surrender. Because if we were to give up and surrender, then where would the Jewish people be now? It took us thousands of years. Look, everybody wants to destroy us every single time. And every single time we survived. We end up,
we're resistant to extermination. So anybody who wants
yeah,
to exterminate us, I'm going to disappoint them very seriously. It's not going to happen. But
yes,
so again, I keep on saying there's a different. I really don't know what it's like in Canada as much as United States of America. But you're right in the sense that the Jewish community has not didn't want to deal with it for the longest time. For the longest time, the Jewish community didn't even want to acknowledge, admit, confront that
yes,
anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. But what I do see a lot of times is, so there's another rivaling the Jewish legacy organizations. In the era of social media, you do have the phenomenon of social media influencers. Young kids
yes,
young, they're between the ages of, I would say, 18 to 30, who are making these reels that go viral. And a lot of times, what I see them doing is talking about a Zionism as an indigenous decolonization movement. So what
Yeah,
they're doing, I think their strategy is instead of saying, that's libel, they're trying to take back the narrative of Zionism. They're in the space of redefining Zionism as a decolonization movement, as an indigenous movement, and that's a different strategy. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I haven't found it to be very effective so much.
yeah,
Um, I don't know if it is, I don't know if it isn't. I haven't really done enough studying, but my issue is that we are still in the position of defense. You see, because for the last 20 plus years,
mhm,
American Jews did not want to talk about Zionism. They didn't even want to use the
no,
word Zionist to define themselves, right? When I was
exactly.
in college and I said, I'm a Zionist, do you know how people would recoil? Jews, they would, wow, she's crazy, radical, right wing. If she calls herself a Zionist, she must be crazy. Like she must
Yeah.
be one of those settlers, one of those crazy settlers, violent. And so what ended up happening inevitably is when you create a vacuum and you're not going to tell your story, well, somebody else is going to tell it for you. And we've got that
Exactly.
story told by our detractors. So now we're playing up big time catch up. And what I see is two strategies emerging. One is these social media influencers who are saying, we're going to tell the story of Zionism as a decolonization, indigenous rights movement. That's what Zionism is. And then there's another movement emerging, which is let's call out and reclaim anti-Zionism. Let's call out anti-Zionism for what it really is, which is institutional racism. And we need to call out the libels over and over and over. So these are the two strategies. And I think that they're not. It's wrong of me to say are they good or bad. They just exist because we're playing catch up, because we've been asleep, unwilling to take it on, confront it for the last 20 years. But it seems to me that both strategies are still, we're still in defense. We're still in defense mode. Well,
And you
you
know why? Because one of the reasons that we are still in defense mode, I actually, that's another thing that I've done research, is there is a social acceptance of something, right? When you run a social acceptance, is like, what is the process of accepting anything new, a new idea? Let's, in this case, is anti-Zionism as a hate movement. So if it's like anti-Semitism, we need anti-Zionism to be accepted as a hate movement, as a racism. How is it a social acceptance? We are still in step one. There are 5 steps. And step one is awareness of anti-Zionism, right? And step two is community organization, means the community is all accepted. And now we actually need to organize ourselves. In step three is elite accepting it because our community has already accepted it. In step four is elite consensus, now agreement among elites that anti-Zionism is inherently hateful. And step five is actions taken by elite to enforce the basically understanding of anti-Zionism is a hate movement. We cannot jump to step five if we're still in step one. So we need to make sure that the awareness of anti-Zionism, understanding the tactics, the strategy of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is actually the evolution of anti-Zionism is all realized within our organizations, whether grassroots, institutional, all of them. Legacy, or I don't like calling it legacy. It's organizations, all of them there this so all of this has to be established first. They have to accept it. The awareness of anti-Zionism has to pass. When it's passed, we go into next step. It's a community organization. We organize ourselves as a community, but we're not there. we
so you
are
think we're in step one. We're in step one. Wow,
we are in
that's
step one, and I've been trying to move needles to step one. And this is why, you know, I'm trying to spread as much as possible to bring into the awareness. It's here. Understand anti-Zionism. Understand why it happened. Understand that what you're experiencing is basically the inheritance of the Soviet propaganda. It's just, amplified here in the Western world after so many years. But it's here. They need to understand all of that. They need to understand so they can actually detect it next time it comes around, but at least so we can know how to fight it. And I think they're coming to it because I saw CJ as an example already, admitted and basically announced that libels, genocide libels, inverting reality back in January 2025. That's good. That's a good start. So that I would like to see them move a lot faster. So
Yeah.
we are in step one, and we can't jump to step five if we're still in step one. Unfortunately, it takes time, but to do it, we have to repeat it, continuously repeat it, educate, continuously talk about it. And yes, I agree with you. We have to be on the offensive side. We have to catch up. And the way we're really going to catch up is when we all going to be, basically in step five. That's going to be, we're not going to be catch
Yeah,
up
I
anymore. We're going to be
understand.
ahead.
I understand. I guess my frustration with the Jewish community is that we are still in, no matter what, it's rigged so against us that it's we're defending our position. No, when these social media influencers want to prove that we are indigenous, that this is a decolonization, I see it as no, 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 we are not the villain. Let us show you that we are good. We are not this bad colonizer. We are not the oppressor. And in the year 2012, I believe, years ago, I read an essay by a Hillel rabbi at Columbia University.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about it as that this is not a pig experiment. And he said, tell someone that they're a pig. Just come up to someone and say, you are a pig. The
I like
person
that.
will, the person will say, I'm not a pig. Then you will say, of course you are a pig. Look at you, you're a pig. And the person will answer, but I don't oink. I don't have hooves. But what he's saying is the moment you say, I don't oink and I don't have hooves, I'm not a pig, you still see your mind sees the symbol of a pig because you're still saying, I'm not X.
Yes.
And I would love the Jewish community to stop wanting to prove that we are not X. You know, I asked you what your tagline is. You shared that your tagline is defend truth, deliver results, never surrender. One of my taglines that I've developed with my cousin actually is we're here, deal with it. We're
Mm-hmm.
here. Israel's here. You're going to have to deal with it. You have issues. You have projection problems. We talked about this, you and I offline. Every accusation is a confession. Every
Exactly.
accusation waged against Israel is really an accusation of their crimes. You have a problem with colonialism. You have a problem with crimes against humanity. I'm sorry you feel that way. We're here. You're going to have to deal with it. And
Yeah.
so, with my students, and I teach them a lot, what's the best way? They ask me, when somebody says Israel's an apartheid state, what do I say? And years ago, I would tell them, well, you should say, give the facts why it's not. That's wrong. You should absolutely say, excuse me, I'm not engaging in that libel. That's a libel. You're
Mm-hmm.
defaming me. And that's your problem. You must have a problem. You must have a problem with
Mm-hmm.
apartheid. I don't know why you're bringing it up. That's not a me problem. It's a you problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I would love to see the Jewish community. Furthermore, step six, if I may, if I could, would be completely change the playing field where we're not even talking about ourselves, we're talking about them, their crimes, their
Mm-hmm.
crimes, their crimes, their crimes. And we're not projecting. Those are truths. Those are not actual
Yeah.
projections. They're the crime. They're the ones committing the crimes. So I think as we're wrapping up, I
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to ask you so much more. I mean, maybe you'll come back again for part two about Soviet Palestinian identity because something that doesn't get
Yes, that they created.
right,
The
because
Soviets
something
created.
I
Yes.
wanted to talk to you about, which is the role that the Soviets played in crafting, creating this Palestinianism. And so I think that maybe we'll leave that for another time. But I really want to thank you. I want to thank you for all your work. I want to remind everyone to go to pieforall.org. I found it to be probably one of the best and the best educational material that explains the systemic evolution of this hatred and the libels. So I want to thank you for that. And if you have anything that you want to say, please let us know. If there's any other places that people want to follow you or anything that you want, any outgoing messages, what are some of your outgoing messages for us today?
So the message I would like to mention to everybody that it's important that Jews are united. When we are unite, we're louder, we're stronger, and more capable of creating real change. And we really need to make a difference. And by the most impact we can do when we're united and we follow, basically, we're working at it together and having the same goal. We have to remember that, when you look at a lot of people don't realize the state of Israel, the emblem of the state of Israel, it was actually from Zechariah the prophecy, 6th century BC.
Mhm.
So, it's came, when you look at it, when we come from Jacob, which is name Israel, 12 tribes of Israel, King David of United Israel, right? And goes into King Solomon, Joshua the priest, King Zerubbabel, and now the state of Israel. We have continuation. It never broke. We
Mhm.
have the, prophets that actually say that we come from the four corners of earth and actually bring and rebuild Israel. And
Mhm.
it's all materializing now.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people don't realize it that we are living the prophecy.
Mhm. Beautiful,
So this is a very
powerful.
important thing to remember that it's eternal, and we have that power, especially when we're together. So
Absolutely. I think what you're reminding us is not that only where we come from, but where our destiny. It's not just our
yes,
beginning, it's our prophecy is it's where we're supposed to be. So thank you so
yes,
much for coming on my show. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Don't know much about. You could listen on Apple, Spotify. Stay tuned for our next episode.